Hello and welcome to the Google TV Developers Office Hours Halloween Edition. I'm your host today, Crispy, and I have with me Christian. As well, we have Les Vogel and a special guest today. Leon, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Leon Nichols, and most people know me for being the developer of Able Remote.
Cool. So before we actually jump into your demo, a few things that we're going to go over. I have some news. As our new format goes forward, I'm introducing little bits of news. The first and foremost that I think is on everybody's mind right now, the Hurricane Sandy that struck New York recently and kindly flooded out the subway system. So if you're in New York, we feel for you. Hopefully it's not affecting your Google TV development efforts. On completely unrelated news, LG U+ has brought IPTV with Google TV to Korea. This launched October 15th, and I believe we had Psy as part of the promotional campaign for that.
We did.
So
Yes,
a little bit of Gangnam Style going on. No, I will not break into dance right now. That comes for later. What else is in the news? We have Logitech has finally gotten a Play Store update. So those of you with Logitech reviews and you're developing on it, now if you have applied the latest OTA, which has gone out, you should see the newer Play Store, which is kind of cool. And I guess last in my news items, I have Hisense has put together a website announcing their spiffy new device. You can check that out. I'll put the link in the show notes afterwards, but for those who want to dive in and check it out right now, you can go to hisense-usa.com/pulse, P-U-L-S-E/, and you can see all the details about their new and upcoming device. So that brings us into, I guess, our newer segment called Interesting Ideas. And the first thing I want to talk about in Interesting Ideas this week is home screen replacements. This is something that I've started to look at a lot more recently. I've been toying around with this at home. And there's actually a Google TV home screen replacement I found in the Google Play Store recently. I don't know how good it is yet. I haven't played with it, but I like the momentum. I like the direction that it's going in. So if you want to check that out, the one that I'm referring to is Free DI Channels for Google TV, and it's by Macro Mobile Inc. So you should be able to find that in Play Store. It looks like a really good V1 of a home screen replacement. So that's something I would highly encourage you guys to check out and maybe consider writing your own home screen replacement. So that's the first part of the Interesting Ideas. The second part is, Leon, I want to hand over to you so that way you can demo the really cool thing that you shared with us earlier in the week.
So I'll post the YouTube link on the Google Plus page for now. So if somebody wants to go and look at that, it gives you an introduction to the what I'm talking about now. But basically, I got myself a Raspberry Pi recently, and I've been trying to create a kind of a home automation infrastructure for myself, which includes controlling my Google TV. Now, to do that, at the moment, there's code available from Google, but it's all Android-based. So I'm not running Android on my Raspberry Pi yet, maybe sometime soon. But I'm running Java on here, and I wanted to have a way to control my Google TV just using Java. So I took the Anymode library and removed all the Android dependencies and made them all Java, pure Java, and got it working. So now there's a library that allows you to write Java programs that can control your Google TV. And I'm running it on a Raspberry Pi, but you can really run it anywhere you have a 1.6 JRE from a desktop or Windows or Mac OS X if you wanted to. And there might be some really interesting things you could do with that. So for myself, I'm trying to do some kind of automation thing, which would include switching on the devices connected to the Google TV device. And this is just the first step of it. So after you watch the video, you can also go and play with the code. I've open sourced the library so that anybody can go and write their own Java programs and control the Google TV, maybe do some interesting project. As a follow-up on this first open source library, I'm also going to make a version that should run under Android. So I'm kind of bringing it back home again. Because obviously there would be some interesting applications for second screen apps beyond just the scripting opportunities with the Java library. Now, in terms of the functionality, anything you could do with your physical Google TV remote, you can do with this Java library. And you can do everything programmatically. So once you get past the pairing stage, from there on you can write everything in code. You don't actually have to have a user interface for the user, and so you could do some interesting, automated stuff with that.
So what do you see as a typical automation scenario?
Well, for example, the first thing I do in the morning is I switch on the TV and I go to a certain channel. So rather than doing that by going to the remote, I can do that by maybe having a sensor that picks up that I've just walked into the room and switch on the TV for me. So that's a simple scenario. And you could, go to your favorite channel or go to your favorite website, maybe look at the weather. There's all kinds of things you can do with that. The other thing is that it's not just about Google TV. It's nice that you can control the other devices. You can control your AVR, you can control the STD. So, for example, I could, switch it on to, play certain music for me. So that's really nice. It gives me, control over things which is kind of complicated for me to do by myself if I didn't have the Google TV device support.
So you see this as an extension of sort of home automation and, something you could set up, hey, you turn your key in your front door and automatically your TV comes on and maybe it's controlling other things too then?
Yeah. So this is kind of the first part of it. I've already started on the second part, which will be kind of a more full-fledged component of what the final solution will be. But yeah, I mean, this is just one simple case. You could also write your own desktop app. If you wanted to have maybe a Google TV GUI on your desktop computer, you could write one with this. It's very easy to add your own user interface. The library was specifically designed to be independent of the user interface. So let's say you want to use Java Swing to make your own UI, you can go ahead and do that. And so there's some interesting use cases to just use it as a remote also.
So what made you choose the Raspberry Pi over, say, Arduino or NetDuino or any of the other multi-boards that have come out recently?
Oh, I've got a pile of Arduinos here too. This just happens to be the coolest thing at the moment. It is really, really very interesting to see at this price point what you can do. It really is incredible. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening with the platform in terms of not just Linux, but other OSs that are would be available for this platform soon, including Android. You can run it at the moment. It's extremely slow, but the Raspberry Pi Foundation are working on an optimized version, so that could be very interesting to have Android running on here. Just imagine all kinds of automation type things, and you can write it all in the same programming language. You don't have to even go to Java if you wanted to. But yeah, it's one little toy that's part of a kind of a bigger idea that I have for doing stuff at home, kind of as a side project.
Cool. So if people want to, I guess, see what you've done or contribute or ask you questions, how can they do that?
Well, I think the best is to contact me via the GitHub source control. And if there's any questions about that, or otherwise just through Google+. You should be able to contact me. I'll send a message or an email. Okay. Some developers have already indicated they're interested in it because of there's certain things they want to do that they can't do with the Unimode library at the moment. So there might be something interesting coming from other developers too. Cool.
Well, we'll post in the show notes where to access the source code and how to view the demo video that you put together that unfortunately we couldn't show through the Hangout. And if anybody has questions for Leon now, live, I guess we could take them. Otherwise, we're going to move on to a discussion topic that Christian and I both found very interesting, and I think we've spent many hours talking about this.
Oh, I have spent years by now talking about this at various events. It's actually interesting. I was 2 weekends ago. I was in Texas at the big Android barbecue, and there was a lot of Android developers. And I was actually struck again how many developers still don't fully utilize things like display-independent pixels or know about Android DPIs or things like 9-patch images. So for some developers, this is really super intuitive. For others, it's not.
Well, I guess we should introduce the topic.
Yeah.
You kind of went right into it. So,
all right.
There are Stack Overflow questions that come up regularly. One of the ones that I pulled out today, I'm just going to read it verbatim. I started writing a Google TV app, and display metrics .width pixels equaled 1804, and height pixels equaled 1008, and density DPI was set to 320. Has anyone got a setup for the graphical layout editor, because I can't use WYSIWYG, etc. Problems dealing with, hey, the screen size isn't what I expected, and the resolution isn't quite what I was expecting. So, there are two main DPIs, the 213 DPI and the 320 DPI. But, with overscan, if a user hasn't configured their Google TV properly or at all, or their screen resolution is kind of weird because they've got a low-grade screen that they've attached it to, you might not end up with the same DPI that you expect, or the same screen, or same number of device-independent pixels as you expect.
Well, actually, the DPIs is not going to change. So the DPI is a function of 720 versus 1080p resolution.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
What is going to change is the total available pixels on screen. And as Crispy pointed out, unfortunately, even today with digital televisions, there is still overscan. Some TVs, depending on the settings, do not display the full 1920 by 1080 pixels on the screen. So as a platform, we basically had two choices. We could always output, from an Android point of view, a full screen 1080p image, but then developers would have to deal, each individual developer would have to deal with the overscan. That is, for example, extremely bad when you have icons that are on the top or bottom of the screen or left or right of the screen. So the decision that Google TV made a few years ago now is to compensate for the overscan by giving the user an option to adjust the screen size to match the physical available screen size. And that can result in your application running on Google TV, which has fewer than 1920 by 1080 pixels.
Or, yeah, but the device-independent pixel count
is, so the device-independent pixel count for 1080p is exactly half of the physical pixel count. So on a full high-resolution display, you would get 960 by 540. If you have overscan, then that can be less. It can be 920 or 900 or sometimes even 800 by 450 or something. I don't know what the minimum is we support. But right now, at least, the display-independent pixels are identical between 720 and 1080. So if you switch resolutions, that does not change. And as Crispy's alluded, we have constantly discussions in the office trying to improve and trying to see how we can make it life easier for developers. So I think one of the discussions that we've had recently and that I want to just throw out to developers is it actually a good idea to have those numbers that we have today, the 213 and the 240?
So, we want to open it up to you guys since you're here. Let's discuss this a little bit. If anybody has strong opinions about it or ideas.
Do people actually use display-independent pixels, or is this something that, yeah, so Leon is familiar with it.
And just to be aware, I've muted everybody, so you might have to unmute before you can talk.
Yeah, so, I mean, although our UI on the TV at the moment is very basic, we had to put that in because one of the things we did for our app was to submit it to Sony to be a featured app. and they actually have a bunch of tests, which includes running it at the lowest or the most extreme case for the borders. And so the first thing was we had to make sure we had to do the DIP stuff correctly, but secondly we had to make sure that even with all the edges cut off, that all the text specifically was visible. That's something we hadn't done originally with the app.
Yeah. So one of the side effects of what we have right now with 320 dpi is that the screen size effectively, as I said, is 960 by 540. That is actually fewer DPs than what you would expect, for example, even on a tablet. So most tablets today have 1200 by 720. So one of the ideas that I'm toying around with is if, for example, hypothetically, we would change the DPIs to 240, we would arrive at more
1280
DPs
by 720.
Yeah, we would have 1280 by 720 on the screen. A side effect is the fonts would get smaller. So I think it's a sort of a trade-off between giving developers more real estate on the screen, or of course then shrinking
every other
relatively
application,
speaking, all the other apps.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many. So Leon, do you feel when you develop for Google TV or anybody else on the video, do you actually run out of DPs? Do you sometimes wish you would have more DPs available, or for example, to transfer your tablet layouts more easier?
I think it's going to become maybe more of an issue as people develop tablet apps and want to also do it for the TV. Because now you're very aware of this issue on the TV. That's kind of one issue. The other issue is it's almost the reverse of it. The fact that you have less DPs actually help you think about the TV experience in a better way. To not kind of fill the space with everything and not to have the same experience as you would have on a mobile phone or tablet. To really think about, using the space but not try and fill it with everything, which I think is probably more of a norm on the mobile devices. So in a way it helps, but it's something I think most developers don't think of when they go to the TV. And so maybe there is something still not quite right about the process.
Yeah, I also think sometimes we have to keep in mind, with Google TV becoming more international, and as Crispy said, we just had a very successful launch in Korea. In other countries, people actually have smaller TVs and smaller living rooms in general. So we've seen, for example, in Korea, what we call the 10-foot experience here in the US. It's really more like a 5-foot experience. People sit closer to the TV, but then they only have, instead of a 60-inch television, they have a 35-inch television. So, yeah, I think
localization plays a big role in this as well. I guess it wouldn't make sense to give some sort of mode control to the developer then. I mean, we kind of have it already with like 720p and 1080p, and we've abstracted that away with the 96540, but imagine if there was some programmatic way to, say I want to use the high granularity mode or low granularity mode to get those different densities. I don't know, maybe it would just add to the confusion in the layouts, though.
I mean, one of the ideas we've tossed around here was, right now, the reason we have 213 DPs is so that when you switch to 720p, the number of DPs stays constant. So the ratio is exactly the same as the screen resolution ratio. So if we would go to just, for example, 240, but keep 240 for both 720 and for 1080, then we would end up with a situation where you have, relatively speaking, more screen real estate on a 1080 screen versus a 720 screen. That might be one idea. The other thing that I've started to think about in my back of my mind is also 4K screens, which are coming.
I think we're still, at least half a decade to a full decade away from realizing that. I mean, yes, the market's accelerating, but personally, I don't think the 4K screens are going to make an appearance anytime soon. People are just getting into the space that we have today.
Yeah, and the other fact is, as you know, as you get higher DPs, of course, your resources grow. You know,
Right.
and it's actually quite dramatic, especially when you deal with images. And specifically on Google TV, since the storage space is quite limited, you can't really go crazy on that side.
It's 96 megabytes of RAM, I think, is allocated per running application.
Yeah.
So that it's something you're probably going to run in quite quickly when you want to do high-res graphics at a high DP.
Yeah. Sometimes developers or users forget that when the resolution doubles, your screen assets quadruple. It's by the square of the size. All right, so I would say in the comments, let's just keep the conversation going. I'm curious about input from developers who actually use DPs, and give us your feedback. Let us know if this is something that you think works just fine, or if you struggle with it, if you have any other ideas, stuff you've thought about, let us know.
We're in the planning stages for future work. So the other thing that we have going on for today's Hangout, if I can find the window now.
Sorry guys, can I just make a suggestion in terms of this DP discussion? Could we have like a topic in the tracker? Because then people can add their comments there and we can all look at the same comments.
We can do that.
Tracker.
Issue tracker? Yeah, that works.
Or Google Plus thing.
Yeah, just some way we can see the thread, because otherwise it's just all independent kind of discussion.
Right. I kind of like the issue tracker one because I think it would also increase the visibility. So, do you want to create the issue, Leon?
Sure.
Awesome. All right. So we have 2 Dory questions, and just to let everyone know who's tuning in now or at a later time through YouTube and our channel there, I've started to limit the time period that people can add questions to the moderator. Typically, I'm going to be opening it up on the Monday at 2 p.m. before the Wednesday Hangout, and then the moderator closes off at the time that we start the Hangout itself. So there's 2 questions here, but I've also taken the liberty of searching through Stack Overflow to find some what I consider interesting questions that I think we could talk about and discuss a little bit. So let's start with the moderator, and then we can migrate into the Stack Overflow question.
Yeah, Crispy, there's also one on the thread.
On the thread. I have too many channels of information coming at me.
Yeah. It's basically asking about the Google Plus app optimized for Google TV.
The Google Plus app optimized for Google TV. The only answer that I can say is I have nothing to announce at this time. I should have wore that shirt today.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just as scary as my costume. So it is Halloween. For those who are tuning in or like, why is this guy dressed up this way? I'm wearing my circa 1991 Russian military general uniform with some KGB symbols here. So I'm the spooky former military commander on campus.
Yes, you have no red on you.
I've got red. You just can't see it here. I've also got with me, you know, what military costume wouldn't be complete without a flask full of vodka?
Excellent.
Excellent. Yes. No, we're not going to be drinking on the Hangout right now.
We'll save that for the after.
We'll save that for the after party. Yeah. All right. Let's jump into these moderator questions and sort of keep the pace going. Let's see. The documentation for the GTV emulator located at developers.google.com/tv/android/docs/GTV_emulator says you cannot run the GTV emulator on Windows. Is this true? When will GTV emulation be available on Windows? So, Les, you can start, and I will add things.
Real soon.
Okay, that's the shortest answer I think I've heard you give in a while.
Yeah, I sometimes give those. It should be out. The 2.12 emulator should be out in a few days or a week.
Stay tuned. It's coming. For those of you who are using the emulator, there's a few things that I feel are important to point out, and you know, they are as follows. One, with the emulator, you do not get, I guess, full device compatibility. There's no HDMI in. You don't have access to MDNS and any like because it's in its own little space. There are hacks and workarounds. I highly recommend that any developer who's building for Google TV get a Google TV device. They're really not that expensive, and if you're investing the time to develop, you should do it with the real hardware. You will have a much smoother time transitioning into this space, I think.
Also, I think it's really important if you create an application for the living room, you need to use it in the living room and you need to try it. It's a very different environment than creating an app in an emulator on a desktop. I think the emulator has its place for some limited UI testing. One other thing that does not work in the emulator really is multimedia, and I think a lot of TV applications should include streaming video, streaming audio, which is really not very well simulated in the emulator.
Right. Well, I mean, you're in that mindset. I mean, I've heard this a few times. You're sitting at your desk. You don't have a TV on your desk, so you're like, well, what can I use so I can keep my flow going? And the emulator seems to make sense, but it's a stopgap for only solving certain types of development problems in this space. The other thing I hear a lot is, can I connect the Google TV device to an HDMI monitor? You can, but the monitor has to support HDCP, which not everybody realizes or understands. So it can be a bit of a pain, but maybe bring your laptop into your living room and code that way. That works. I mean, we put TVs on our desks. That's not practical for everybody, but it does get you farther than the emulator will, at least from a real development case, and keeps you in the right user headspace, I think.
Yeah. Also, the remote control is critical. I mean, on an emulator, you use the keyboard, which is
really performance, and frankly, a real box is only $99.
The question came from me, and I'm trying to get other people interested in if we can use the emulator at sort of a lower platform for getting people in. They can say, ooh, this is cool. I think I'll go out and spend $99. And it sounds like in a couple weeks or soon, it's going to be a non-issue. So, woohoo!
To run on Windows, according to Les, yes.
Yeah.
But
again,
nothing will substitute the real device.
Yeah.
Well, and you saw my comment. I tried doing the debug with the hardware device. It worked when I first got it, but I'm on a different PC on a different subnet, and it just got all confused. I've only spent 20 minutes playing with it, so I could probably get something to work, or I don't really care, but my goal was, and here's easy ways for people to start playing.
Okay. So maybe as you uncover those and figure out your workflow, I would highly encourage you to maybe do some screencasts and possibly post those to your blog. That would be a
I'm
great
horrible I'm way behind on the billions of screencasts I'm supposed to do, but it's on my list, trust me.
Awesome.
Can I just say from our experience, using the device is really the way to go. We spend some time with the emulator, but you'll end up running into a problem pretty soon, no matter what kind of app you do. And it's so easy, it's so fast. Once you've set it up, it is really the fastest way of developing. So if you want to be the most productive in running Google TV apps, use a device.
That's what I did when I first started playing with it. You may not know, my app is to get App Inventor to work with Google TV. And I've got that solved. Now it's to get the App Inventor users to use the compiler to generate Google TV apps. And for that, I'm just trying to lower the entrance. Once they get in, I assume that they'll do reasonable things.
Okay. It's a little hairy to set up, but I'm encouraged by what you're doing. So hopefully you can figure out how to get traction and let us know how that goes. I'm going to move us on to the next question, just to keep things flowing here. What's the best component to mount a horizontal list for TV? So horizontal scroll view, custom grid view, view pager, or other? This is from Brazil. Everybody goes silent.
Horizontal list.
So I think what they're asking is, what's the best
gallery
component
view.
for a gallery view?
Yeah.
Oh, I know, but I can't talk about it.
It's just rectangles, Les.
It's just rectangles, nothing more.
Rectangles, exactly.
So I'm gonna say, I mean, I'm a big fan of OpenGL, so you could like really go crazy and create your own custom widget with OpenGL surfaces and loading images. But I can. Oh, Les is championing that one. Christian here is cringing beside me and sighing. So, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think OpenGL it's actually fairly easy if you just have bitmaps and stuff. So it's not rocket science. What I would say is if you want to stick with Android, just horizontal scroll view works fine. The focus issues are sometimes a little bit tricky, so you may have to override your focus handling.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
That sounds right.
All right. So with that, we'll move on to sort of the Stack Overflow questions that I've pulled aside here. And these ones, again, these are not in any specific priority. They were just, I went looking through the list, and these are the ones that caught my eye. So I've one, Vineet asked, I'm trying to run Google TV Maps example on the Google TV emulator. Haha. I'm facing an issue as the emulator does not contain the Google Maps application that apparently is required to run. Does Google TV support Google Maps?
Yes.
Yes.
It does, but not as in a Maps application.
Well, the Maps API is supported, but not. There's sample code called Maps on TV that's open sourced, and it's in market. And you can build it, play with it.
Right, and if you wanted to add maps directly into your application, you could always use the Maps API directly.
Right,
Yeah,
that's what Maps on TV does. And so, and Vibob wrote that.
So, Vineet, hopefully you will see that and make some progress with the app you're building. Another question from Terra Loca. Is there a way to grab the Latin long that corresponds to the zip code the user supplied when setting up their Google TV box? Yes, there is. What you want to do is use the get system service asking for the location service, which will give you a location manager object that you can then ask the location manager object for the get last known location static. And that'll return a location object to you that you can then get the Latin long from. You will also need to add the user's permission for android.permission.access course location. So I believe this stuff is all covered in the base Android API documentation. So the trick here for Google TV is when requesting the last known location, the string you want to pass in there is lowercase static. All right?
Just one comment on that.
Sure.
Only works in the US.
Only works in the US.
That was my comment too.
Oh, right. Because, yeah, zip code here. Right.
Yes.
Okay. What could you do, I guess, in Europe?
It also works in Korea.
Okay.
On the LGU+.
So if somebody wanted location not in the US or Korea, what do you think they should do?
Well, we had to go and find another way of mapping an IP address to a location. We couldn't rely on the Google TV API.
So did you use what, just a third-party IP to do a lookup?
There are services, and the good ones you have to pay for, so you can't get it for free.
Would the IP be reliable? It seems like that wouldn't get you a real good address. It would just get you a vague maybe address.
You have to dig around. There are some that are better, so I actually went through a whole bunch of them to find ones that looked reasonably accurate, but even then you have to keep updating the database behind that to make sure that you have an accurate mapping.
Yeah,
I'm trying to be polite, and my answer was going to be stand there with your phone and get the lat long on your phone and flick it over. But I decided that wasn't a good answer.
That's actually not a bad answer if you think about it and think about second screen design. But yeah, Leon, as I remember, you pay for the database and you have to set up your own server Was that what you did, or?
There are various things. There are some that actually provide a service. Obviously, you pay for the service, but yeah, typically you grab a copy of the database and put it on your own server, and then you need to keep the database updated. So
Right,
there's
yeah.
a fee that you pay to have the latest database.
Yeah.
Now that you brought it up, the second screen is what I was really going to say eventually. Anybody that sets up a Google TV that wants lat long probably has a computer down the road, just sitting in the other room, if not anyplace else. And I'm wondering if, as people start seeing Google TV less as a device and more as a screen that's hooked up to your other screens, or who knows running where, then those kind of questions, then it will be reasonable to, lat long. Well, I can't get it here, but I can get it over here.
Yeah. I guess the only issue is that now your mobile app would have to have the permissions for getting the location, and that might be a little bit unusual for some users. They might just ask why you're doing stuff like that.
Well, you just explained it. I mean, that's part of what you should be doing in Google Play, is explaining what your permissions are if they're unusual, and why you get them, and how specifically you use them. That's the recommendation that the Android team has given, at least.
So there are ways to mitigate users and what they think is acceptable and not acceptable. All right, I'm going to move us on to the next question. Somebody asked this, and I thought it was a great question to ask, because I think we've covered it once or twice, but we've got some better answers now. Which resource identifier can I use for Google TVs to distinguish it from phones like Galaxy S3, etc.? Apparently, layout-SW720DP doesn't work. So I took this on as like, hey, what does work? And I at first, I'd always just use layout because I'm usually just writing Google TV apps. But then I tried creating one that would run on a tablet, a phone, and a TV, and I put TV-specific resources in layout-television, which is a new layout that was introduced in 3.2 of Android. And that worked fine until I created another layout directory for layout-large-no touch. And apparently the precedence of layout-large-no touch supersedes that of layout-television.
Have you actually tried layout-television-no touch?
I did not try that one.
We should try that.
We should try that one. Although TV by itself would never have touch.
But the matching algorithm probably matches more criteria.
Right. Okay, yeah, we'll try that one out.
We can try that.
Since you probably want the longer string.
Yeah.
Okay. There are these, like, I was recently reading the precedence rules for how Android decides which layout directory to use for which resources to load in. That's some complicated stuff. It's like regex stuff, only on steroids.
Yes.
Hey, Crispy, have you, do you know the answer of how to determine which box you're on? A Sony or which one that's...
What is the current device, the manufacturing device?
Vizio?
Not yet, but if you really want to know some of that info, you could potentially go to the user agent string from Chrome.
Well, there is a properties and settings
there
class.
Is, yes.
Okay.
So I've actually dug in that around yesterday because I needed to find something. And you can get, like, build information. You can even get, like, what's the current build number that you're running and so on. So
all the stuff that shows up in the status.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So Les, do you know, I would have to look at my code now, do you know the class name off your head?
I don't remember the class, but I was trying to find the actual constant because, here we are. We are recommending now that you use ro.product.model instead of ro.hardware. That is going to be very important in the near future as how you differentiate your Google TV box. So it's ro.product.model.
Yep.
And
so if you need to know the difference between a Vizio and a
Sony,
or a Hisense, that's the way to tell.
All right.
And that should also be if you're trying to figure out if it's an LG as well.
Now, I guess we're going to have to publish a list, or is it just a discovery thing?
We should probably publish something about that. But it just, since you brought up the subject, I thought, oh, well, what about programmatic? Because I've been meaning to write something about this for a while.
All right. So why don't you start publishing a list, and we'll add it to the documentation.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's move on to another one. I'm looking at integrating my Myth TV with Google TV. I would like to have the same level of integration found with Dish Network DVR, ability to set things to record from Google TV and look up recordings. Is there any API that can be used for this, or is it only something that Google and Dish can do via their partnership? So the API you were looking for is talked about in one of our Google I/O talks called Getting Your Content on Google TV, and I think it's...
That was my talk.
That was your talk, that's right. Well, then you should elaborate on this, I think.
Well,
Should.
we've talked about this API a lot. So
Except
it's
we're not going to actually release it this time.
exactly, yeah.
Oh, that's right.
So this was a bad question to bring up.
I forgot.
We're still working on the API, and I mean, the intention of it is that we will have an API for third-party developers to create sort of like a device driver for your connected device. So if you have a device that talks IP and you know the IP protocol, then you're able to include it. If somebody is, and we're sort of kind of in the process of finalizing the API, if somebody would be interested in talking about this, let us know, reach me on Google+. I would be more than happy to hear your use case, make sure we can include that.
So we have one. We'll get that person to contact
Yeah.
you. All right, we'll move on to another question. Bad selection on my part. Does anyone have reference to the key codes for the Sony remote? I have play and stop working, but need pause key codes. Play and pause seem to be referencing the same key code, but the buttons are separate on the remote. So we've got some docs on the GTV controlling guide. So if you go to developers.google.com/TV, I believe if you go /Android/docs, there's a GTV_control guide with media keys. So it's all documented there, and you should be able to find the key code you're looking for. The other thing I would recommend, Christian wrote this great app called Screen Resolution Test. And yes, the name isn't obvious, but you can use this to actually determine the key codes that get sent from the remote. So if you install this app and go into what's the first one called? Resolution Test?
I think it's Resolution Test, yeah. This is my catch-all application that I throw all my demo code and sample code that I need on TV. So yeah, I think it's the
useful
first
for debugging.
menu. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can check that out. I think we mentioned it a few shows ago as well, so we can repost the link to that. What else have I got here? Has anyone successfully made a multi-screen app for Google TV by using the Google TV emulator? If so, then please guide me in the right direction. I forgot I chose so many emulator questions today.
Is that why you had me get on the line?
Yes, yes it is. So just to reiterate, Google TV emulator does not broadcast as an AnyMote endpoint via MDNS, so presently it can't be used for developing multi-screen apps. Yeah, I think we've talked about that enough already, so I'm going to move us on to the next one. Is it possible to create my own custom home application on Google TV? Yes. How you do that? It's very simple. You can go to the Android samples directory for API 13 and look at the home screen replacement example they have there. It actually runs as is on Google TV, and you can see a good example of, how to, take over the home screen, as it were. So you can also check out the application I recommended at the beginning, which is free DI channels for Google TV. It's in the Play Store. I only took a cursory look at it. It looked pretty cool. All right, this was the big multi-part question next.
Oh, I love that one.
So this one really caught my attention because all the people involved in asking it and talking about it on Stack Overflow, they all had reputations in the multiple thousands, usually above 15,000. So, you know, I don't know if we've talked about this stuff before, but I feel it's worth bringing up again now. And I'll just read it kind of verbatim, and then you guys can all sort of jump in. You've already answered some of this, so
There's actually one part I haven't answered. The very first question.
the very first question. All right, so we'll start with that. First of all, I'm not asking if it's okay to totally forget about efficiency when writing an application for Google TV. I would never do that. But I'm still curious. What are the differences?
Actually, to the first question.
Oh, that one.
Yeah,
Okay.
the first one.
Gotcha.
So is it okay to forget about performance and efficiency on Google TV? I think that's an absolutely bad idea. I think Google TV is really important to be responsive. People are used to things moving around on a TV. Usually when things stop moving on a TV, people get nervous, something crashed. About performance, I know sometimes it takes a while to, for example, load assets from your servers. Really, be very, very conscious about displaying progress bars or some sort of indicator that, yes, I'm working on it. Another not so favorite mode that I find in a lot of apps is using the same key to bring up and dismiss an action, like the home screen. And sometimes users press the key, nothing happens, they press it again, and then they see an activity flash up and go back away again. So make sure you give the user feedback that, okay, yes, I received your key press, I'm working on it, I'm doing it, stay tuned. Even if it's just for 1 or 2 seconds, it's a good idea. There is some really bad examples out there. There is some applications which take literally a minute or more initially downloading assets and doing things. In this case, do something funny. I mean, just, I don't know, display comic strips or something. Keep the user entertained.
So that least shock and constant user feedback.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So now we're going to continue meetings, unless...
No, that's...
Just as a comment, I would recommend that you also test this on different Google TV devices. We've seen, especially when it comes to animation, even with the OpenGL type animation, that they do perform differently on the different hardware. And so it would be good to get a range, maybe a lower-end device and a high-end device to kind of see, you know, something that will work for both, and not just assume that people are going to buy the high-end devices.
Yeah, a Vizio device or Hisense device is very different than an LG, graphics performance-wise.
Also, I mean, for a developer of the class of Leon, where you really write applications for a broad audience, I would very much recommend to still test on a Generation 1 device, on some of the Intel devices. Especially with hardware acceleration, there are some significant differences.
Yeah. Christian, to your question earlier, which was also my comment, so far the only thing I've been able to find to get the RO properties is to do to exec with getProp.
I'll look at my code in a second after the show. I'll post in the comments.
All right, maybe we'll post something,
Yeah.
a deeper write-up, or maybe even a
Yeah.
screencast or blog post or something. So we'll provide some more information for that. So I've only gotten past the first sentence of this question.
Okay.
It's already
Go, keep
generated
going.
quite a bit of controversy. Well, not
It's gonna get
controversy.
better.
It's going to get much better because this is long. It's all right. So I'm still curious. What are the differences between developing something for a Google TV and a mobile device, such as a tablet handset? I found a lot of information online about the differences in user interface design, i.e. TV is meant to be more social, no screen orientation, no touchscreen, etc. But none of the documentation describes the hardware-specific differences between the two devices. To be more specific, considering that Android was originally designed for mobile devices with limited memory, is designing an application for Google TV any different? So you started to answer this one with what you had here. Do you want to read it? Do you want to just say it again?
Let me just make sure I cover all the topics here, so I'll glance at my notes. But the question was really whether the... So let me paraphrase this. So Android devices were very limited especially with memory. Is Google TV any different? And Google TV is still very memory constrained. We really try to produce affordable devices. So right now, a Google TV has about 1 gigabyte of total memory, which is shared between the Dalvik virtual machine and the hardware acceleration, video decoding, and so on. So ultimately, the Dalvik VM has about 600 megabytes on our devices today. What we have done is we have increased the per application limit. So for example, on a Galaxy Nexus phone, each application gets 64 megabytes of total memory. On Google TV, we bumped it up to 96 megabytes, and we actually did some tests. We initially thought, well, maybe we should just double it and go to 128. But keep in mind, it's a trade-off between how much memory each application gets and how many applications you can run at the same time. So we felt that 96 is a reasonable compromise. The reason we actually had to bump it up is, as Leon mentioned earlier, is screen resolution has gone up significantly. Assets are bigger, resources are bigger. So just having one full screen image for Google TV is about 8 megabytes of RAM. So 96 megs is still fairly constrained. It's especially noticeable for people who do things like loading in a lot of thumbnails. So we have some application developers who, for example, want to show a library of movies and they want to load cover art for each of the movie. And holding all those bitmaps in memory at the same time, you run out of memory pretty quickly. So it's important that developers load things on demand, recycle bitmaps, and have an overall, like, I want to say, efficient programming style.
So you've just actually triggered an interesting thought in my head. So if you have a service that you're running as a separate process, is it going to get a separate 96 megs of RAM?
You should.
So in theory, you could, I'm not recommending this at all to anybody, by the way. You could, in theory, load your image resources and pass them through as a binary exchange for display.
Don't do that, kids.
Don't do what Crispy does. He's been drinking. No.
Vodka. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Anybody else want to add to that, or shall I move on to the next part of the question? No? All right. So phones and tablets don't have the luxury of swap space, and therefore are hard to, therefore there are hard limits on memory. Is this also the case with Google TV?
Yes.
So nice, simple, short answer. No swap space. Part 3 is the Dalvik VM is optimized for minimal memory footprint on handsets and tablets. Is Google TV powered by the exact same VM, slightly different version designed specifically for Google TV, but with the same design goal in mind, or a completely different VM with different design goals in mind?
You know, there have been rumors that we like to re-implement stuff here at Google. But once we have a virtual machine that works really well, we tend to stick with it. So the Dalvik VM is really exactly the same virtual machine for simply the reason that the constraints are exactly the same. We still have an embedded system, we have flash file systems, we have no swap space, and we need to be memory efficient. At the same time, of course, we want to be as fast as possible. And we felt that the Dalvik VM does all this. On top of it, it already helped us a lot with the Intel to ARM transition, where for users who develop Dalvik code, it's completely transparent what processor you run on.
It's another big thing for device independence.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else want to add to that before I move on to the next piece? No? Awesome. What are the actual differences in hardware when comparing handsets, tablets, and Google TV? Are the differences significant? Other than touchscreen?
You know, it's really stereotypical by now, but I will mention the touchscreen again because that is the biggest difference. And usually when I talk with developers at first, they dismiss it and they're like, oh yeah, whatever, it's super easy. But you need to redesign your layouts. There is a difference between an app that just barely runs on a television and an app that is really a great experience and is really optimized. So this is the most visible difference, I think. Once people get going and they dig deeper into it, probably the most surprising and most stunning feature of Google TV hardware is the video decoder. It's really not easy to decode Blu-ray quality, streaming encrypted video files, and push 30 frames per second at 8 megabytes per frame through HDMI to the television. So there's a lot of video processing going on under the hood. We really want to be Google TV to be the primary reference for how to deliver streaming video over the internet, and we put a lot of effort into that. That also includes things like state-of-the-art content protection. We know that, well, movies are expensive. People who produce movies would like to license them, would like to make money on them. We want to help them and make sure that their content is secure, and we want to make sure that users get access to the most high-quality video content. So we have PlayReady, we have Widevine, we have HLS with AES encryption. So there's a lot of different choices for video delivery.
And on top of that, you can monitor the stream of video live, right? Like that takes additional tooling and is going to consume more memory. QoS API is what I'm getting at there.
Lots of stuff.
So the chipset, there are significant differences, but part of that is also isolated.
Yeah, I mean, for a user, basically the user interface is you give us a stream URL and you kick off playback, and then the developer can sit back and, as Crispy said, can monitor the quality, but all the decoding goes on behind the scenes. But that is one of the differences. People sometimes say, well, hey, I have a Raspberry Pi, it runs Android. I don't know if this one has HDMI out, but some of the ARM devices have HDMI out, but there is a reason Google TV is really optimized for television. We have a lot of decoders.
We have dedicated hardware that is not available on any other Android device.
Yeah.
Period. I'm sure people are going to start trying to strap on FMPG chips to their devices at some point. Leon, maybe that's your next project. All right, I think we've covered that part of it significantly. We have one other part to this question. Does Ice Cream Sandwich and Jelly Bean improve performance in any way? Does it make use of these new hardware capabilities?
Yes, if they ever exist.
If they ever exist.
Well, I mean, we already use the hardware codecs, so the video codecs, so we do that pretty efficiently. I can't comment about Ice Cream Sandwich or Jelly Bean or anything else.
Nothing to announce at this time.
Yeah.
We need a little cardboard sign.
I made shirts for us. Do you remember?
That's right. I should have worn my shirt today.
Yes. I'll have to make more funny shirts like that.
But the Ice Cream Sandwich and Jelly Bean run faster on an Android phone. So you can expect that since we did announce that we were going that direction at I.O., when that happens, it will be faster.
That's true. All right.
Christian's so good.
I'm just sitting here smiling.
Like I said, he was brought in to look pretty today, right? So is designing for Google TV different than from tablet? What do I need to keep in mind while designing the UI for Google TV? Well, fundamentally, no touch screen. The user, which we've already touched on a lot of these points. The user is a lot farther from the screen, except in Korea, where apparently they sit inches from the screen.
5 feet.
Pardon?
5 feet is what we've been saying.
Oh, okay. Not inches. Gotcha.
I
misheard.
And it would be in meters.
Right, metric. So the input devices are different. Obviously, no touchpad means D-pad and trackpad to a limited degree. And I think the LG has like gesture control, kind of. It's a little. It's in development. It kind of works. You want to consider less information density on the screen. While they are physically bigger, you're farther away, which makes things look smaller. We've covered these things. Yeah. Vertical scrolling versus horizontal scrolling. Nobody likes an infinite drop into hell while looking for that thing that they're trying to watch. So consider your navigation paths carefully. Brightness and color. Don't flood the living room with a whole bunch of white light. Make sure you're not using strong reds on a white background with color vibration. So we have guidelines for this. If you go to developers.google.com/TV, there's a section on designing for TV. Highly recommend looking at that. We've also got presentations we've given. They're peppered around in various sources. Good source to ramp up on this. And I think we're going to be releasing some stuff on Google Developer Academy soon that covers some of this stuff for porting tablet apps to TV. All right, I think we're down to the last one question. Yes, we are. Hello, I'm looking for some insight on how an application I created and installed in Google TV can determine what other apps are on the platform. If my app determines what other apps are on the box, can my app launch them? Can my app be instructed to launch them via Anymote protocols?
You can use the process manager, I believe, and the package manager. To figure out what's on there. You can send intents to apps. Almost all of them respond to open, and you can check out openintents.org to see if the app you're interested in actually has published methods. And lastly, Anymote does not. You can't send from Anymote on a TV, and that has to do with the pairing. Yeah,
but if you're already running on the TV, then Intents is really the intended Android way to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So I think one thing I'm going to add to what you said last. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying we're doing all of that in our app, so it is technically possible.
Yeah.
So with the package manager, when you're looking for the applications that are on the system, I think you want to consider filtering by which applications have a main launcher or have a launcher portion to them, just to save yourself loading or looking through lists of like system services and other things that you wouldn't want to launch directly. That would be my only add-on to that. Again, if you check out the Android home screen sample, there's code in there that shows how to scan the system for launchable applications. Something I came across when building my home screen. So, anybody else have anything to add to that? Otherwise, we're going to wrap it up, I think, for this week. And just a reminder to everybody watching now and going to be watching in the future, we are doing these every 2 weeks now. So the next one will be, I believe, November 13th. Does that sound right?
It's not going to be on Halloween. So.
Yeah, it won't be Halloween, so I will be, dressed in traditional cowboy hat and urban cowboy gear, or maybe I'll wear my I have nothing to announce at this time t-shirt. So yes, hope you like the costume and the cool hats, and hope you got a lot of value out of today's Hangout. It's great to have you as always, and we are signing off. Thanks, Leon.